When I was about 19, I moved out of state to a college I've been wanting to attend ever since my freshman year of high school. It was a private, 4-year university tucked away in a rural mountain area of the Northeast. The school itself wasn't bad, but the area it was in was notorious for people to do drugs, and sirens would be heard a few times a week. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, I move into my dorm and start unpacking my essentials and things I needed for class. Being a biology major studying medicine, I had a ton of textbooks and equipment that had been required. As I'm moving everything in, someone opens the door and looks at me and starts speaking Spanish. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. Trying to be polite as I could, I tell him that I didn't understand him, and he tries his best to say that he was my roommate and his name was Juan. I give him a friendly smile to let him know that I understood, and he goes and unpacks his luggage on his bed. Right off the bat, I could tell that this guy seemed a bit off. He kept turning around and glanced over at me every few seconds or so for no apparent reason. I didn't call him out on it, but every time I looked at him, he'd immediately turn his head to look away. I get done packing and tell Juan that I'm going to the dining hall for food and that I'll be back later. Big mistake. I walk out of my dorm and Juan follows me straight to the dining hall. Thinking he was probably just hungry and just needed a friend, I didn't think anything of it and tried to be polite as I could. But whenever I tried to interact or talk with him, he'd give me a dry response or flat out ignore me while watching me eat. What made the whole ordeal more strange was the fact that he didn't get anything to eat other than water. Long story short, I finish my food and he follows me out back to our dorm, still staring at me, not saying a word. I then tell Juan that I have class and that I'll see him later. It was obviously a lie, as classes didn't start till the following week, but hoped he'd take the hint. He doesn't say anything and just nods his head, assuming he understood, and I go ahead and leave. Now, my campus is huge, well over 2,000 acres to be exact, so I knew the chances of him finding me were slim. After about an hour of me having some time to myself, I decide that it's time to go back as we weren't supposed to be out past a certain time. I go back into my dorm and was surprised to see that Juan wasn't in there. Figuring he probably went to the bathroom, I throw myself onto my bed and open up my laptop to watch some videos. When I opened up my laptop, I was in shock after I saw that all of my personal files had been moved around and some even deleted. One of the files was titled Open, which I knew I definitely didn't create. However, I was really on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside this file. My brief look through this strange folder nearly made me sick to my stomach when I opened it. It didn't take me long to realize that this folder was full of disturbing pictures and videos of hardcore child pornography. Just as I saw this, Juan walks in the room and I angrily asked him if he did something to my laptop and showed him what I was looking at. His face went pale and his eyes were as big as saucers. All the while, he kept trying to give me an explanation while drastically stuttering, telling me that he didn't do it. I knew that it had to have been him, as him and I are the only two people who have the keys to this room, and his lies were too obvious. At that point, I grab my laptop and head over to the front desk, telling the dorm supervisor the whole ordeal. Without hesitation, she calls campus security along with the police, and they thankfully arrest Juan after they went through my laptop. It turns out, Juan had a history of pedophilia and had done things like this multiple times. I still don't know how he managed to get into the school if they had done a thorough background check on him. Needless to say, I ended up getting the room to myself for a semester as they were unable to find an extra roommate. I'll admit that it sucked being alone, but it was far better than bunking with a registered sex offender. When I was in my early 20s, I had attended a college in Tucson, Arizona. Because of this, my parents no longer wanted me living under their roof, forcing me to move out and find a place of my own. It wasn't that they didn't want me there, they just wanted me to be responsible. Anyway, I couldn't live in a dorm as it was majorly expensive at the time, so I found a cheap listing on Craigslist for around $200 a month. It was within my price range, so I gave the guy a call and told him that I'd come check out the room after I got out of class. Once my class had ended, I drove over to his house, which was located in the very rural side of my city. Old and ruined houses, rednecks drinking beers on the front porch, overgrown grass, you get the picture. Anyway, I pull up to the guy's address and knock on the already broken door. He came out and introduced himself as Trey and that he was glad to finally meet me. Trying to be nice, I give him a friendly smile and we went inside where he showed me the kitchen and where I'd be staying. The room was just an old bed that was decent and a few cabinets. Other than that, it was empty. He then started asking me if I've ever had sex before and if I liked it. I told him that I wasn't interested in that topic but would like to see more of the house. He immediately felt sympathy for me and changed the subject. But a few minutes after showing me more, he'd bring up the topic again, and that's when I finally told him that I had to leave. He tried stopping me and tried to apologize, but I simply ignored him and got in my car to leave. He thankfully didn't have my address, and I blocked his number so I never heard from him again. I wouldn't say he was really considered as dangerous, but he was definitely not right in the head. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco and checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who had been living there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a bit quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense. When we got back home, She had asked me if I had seen her room yet, to which I then said no, and so she took me to go see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf, and she even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies, Indiana Jones, Transformers, you name it. I really didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy, but the whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room and would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling throughout the walls at night. I wondered as to what the hell she could possibly be doing in there. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes and would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't even say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," and then there would be this long, awkward pause and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her, and she gave me the chills. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. Every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Seeing her stand in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out, and it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. One night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying to say the least. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy topic to get into, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger to me, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle again. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had an unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I ended up waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I then could hear her walk back into her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms, and all I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said that she didn't remember trying to push my door open or telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I had moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies with a friend and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned on my phone, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly came into my room and slit my throat? It still freaks me out till this day.